And we are live. Welcome, Anand, to the Engineering Unplugged podcast. Happy to have you here. Anand, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
I'm Anand Bagmar, and I've been now in the engineering space or the software space, the IT space. There are so many different acronyms, words that we use to describe the simple profession of writing code and making sure it is adding value. But I've now been in this space for more than 20 years. Education done over here in Pune itself. And the last bit of my education, I went to the US to complete my master's in computer science. And since then, I've been working since about 2000, the year 2000, been actively working in the software space. Like most others in the testing area, I wanted to start off with testing as a stepping stone to get into development. Truth be told, I wanted to be a developer because that's where I saw everyone go. So it seemed like a shiny, bright object that I also wanted to be a part of that journey. For whatever reason, I didn't get the kind of development role that I wanted. And I got an opportunity to move to the Bay Area. And since that time, I've worked with many different organizations worldwide, been part of product and services organizations, played many different roles along the way. The titles never really mattered to me, what official title was given. But I wanted to be part of the journey, wanted to be part of doing something that adds value. Along the way, when I was working at ThoughtWorks, I was deeply motivated and pushed by my peers, colleagues, mentors to get more involved in the community side of things. And that means blogging, speaking at conferences, open source. And that is where my journey on the community side really started. I got involved with the Selenium project, the APM project. I'm a small contributor on both of those. I helped on the conference sides of those conferences as well, along with many other conferences and events. Doing whatever it takes and I can do while juggling the only limited number of balls in the air at the time to try and help contribute to the community, keep learning in the process, because when you interact with people, you get to learn a lot from them as well. And that journey continues along with whatever work I'm doing professionally. And that keeps me deeply motivated and excited to be in the space. I've built many different open source tools related to testing because I'm a very lazy person. I don't like to repeat myself or repeat the same activity manually a number of times. So I keep trying to find solutions or innovative, creative, patchy, or as we call in Hindi, jugadu ways of optimizing and not repeating yourself by automating certain things. And that has kept me deeply interested and motivated again. And in many cases, it has helped others who have used those solutions proceeding as well. So that's where I am. That's been my journey overall. Today, I am a consultant. I work with different organizations. I've been working with Applitools for almost 5 years now. I work with Exensio since almost similar time. And again, help out teams trying to build quality solutions to help their customers.
Got it. Uh, Amazing. In the 23 years of you practicing software quality, software testing, and various aspects of it, there must have been some things that you have learned along the way. What were the defining experiences that gave you the beliefs that you hold today?
Thankfully, that belief or clarity came very early in my career, within the first year for that matter, where I was forced to choose a different path. So I started off my journey, as I mentioned earlier, in testing as a foot in the door to get towards development. But I was deeply intrigued and excited about what testing holds as a possibility. Unfortunately, within about a year of me starting my professional journey, there was a huge recession, the dot-com bust that happened in the US and worldwide in the year 2000, 2001.
Right.
I got affected by it. My whole department or vertical in the organization was laid off. And because I was in Silicon Valley, in just a couple of days, I had 5 offer letters in hand. I chose one of them. And I said, okay, fine. I was on a H1 visa. So, okay, let's get the H1 transfer happening. While the transfer is happening, I had a couple of weeks break in between that. I said, okay, I'll go back to India and meet my grandmother who was not well, and I'll come back. By the time I came back, things had changed tremendously. The company that I was supposed to join was almost non-existent. The other 4 offers that were there, they all had either the position filled, but in most likelihoods, they were going through bad patch during the recession as well. So all those offers were also revoked. So I had no job, and I was on H1 visa with a loan, a car, and everything. I needed to take care of that. Fortunately, the Indian mindset of saving always helps. I had certain savings from my first year. And because of the process of the H1 transfer, because it was initiated, thankfully, I could legally stay in the country without worrying of leaving within a couple of weeks. So that was my opportunity to try and find another job as quickly as I can till I had savings. Right. It took good 4 or 5 months to find another thing. And the first job that I got, who was willing to sponsor the H1 visa, I took it. That was in customer support. It was, at that point, I thought it was a step, many steps back, not just a single step back, right?
Right.
Many steps back that I have to go to customer support, but hey, they were willing to pay me, they were willing to sponsor my visa. Let's do that. And that was for Borderland software. And in hindsight, and that hindsight was also actually within the first couple of years in my career itself, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Borderland software, I was working for an enterprise product, VisiBroker Corba at that point in time, supporting that. But the kind of policy, and this was way before Agile or anything else, right? Or before Agile became mainstream, let's call it that. This was when the kinds of policies and all that organizations had for enterprise customers, especially, and all, is if you are a paying customer, you get more value, of course, and that's in a way expected as well from organizations. But the kind of approach that was there of how we solved customer problems was not good at all. And not good from the perspective of the customer.
Okay.
They are a paying customer and you are asking them to do all the work to tell you where the problem in your software is. That just didn't feel right to me.
So what was the approach?
The approach was basically, you are reporting a problem, give us a reproducible test how you can do that. Why you are seeing that problem. Now they are leaving, you are forcing them to leave their core work. They are building massive enterprise software. They have to leave all of that and create a reproducible test for you so that you can see where the problem in your code is, so that you can fix it and give it back to them. And that did not make sense to me. Okay. Of course, in order to fix a problem, you need to know more about it. But I thought it could have been done differently. But that was out of my scope in that sense. But in my mind, that became a very a huge transformational moment to say, why can't we build software in a better way so that these kinds of problems don't happen with the customers? And that is where I started thinking of, I cannot just be testing anymore. I cannot have customers test the software for me. What can I do to help build a better product in the first place so that customers don't go through that kind of problem? And at that point, the approach to testing changed completely. And that changed because I was in customer support. As I started working more in the career, as I started understanding Agile more, right? From moving from a prescriptive checklist based approach, am I doing all the ceremonies, to understanding Agile and then eventually becoming Agile, that journey, I realized very quickly the value of how can you actually help influence quality testing earlier in the life cycle. We always talk about in the Agile space about testing is a team responsibility. Quality is a team responsibility. What does that really mean? And that's when you combine these experiences together, very initial years of my career, I call myself, I like to tell others that yes, I started with testing, but I graduated to quality, to start thinking about software quality. I don't test anymore. I help influence quality. And that influence could be by playing a tester role, by playing a estate role, by playing a developer role, project manager, program manager, product owner, customer support, DevOps, does not matter. These are all business terms or business role-based opportunities that are really there. But each activity that is performed in that SDLC, you can help influence quality. And how can I help in that? So that was my transformational moment, or a journey where that transformation happened. I moved from testing into quality.
Interesting. Very interesting. So just curious, to close on the previous example, what was the change in the testing approach? How was it happening before? And after this learning and after your disagreements, where did it land?
So unfortunately, our industry is a very prescriptive industry. We treat people like resources. And hence it is say, I have so many resources, I need to get them on the team. Or we think about our capacity as resources. How many resources do you have? That is the aspect that needs to change, because when you are resources, machine is a resource. You tell the machine what is to be done. You're telling these human resources what is to be done. That part needed to change. With that approach, what it means is individuals need to start thinking on their own. Yes, you need guidance because eventually you're serving a bigger purpose in that organization. You need guidance, but you also need the ability to think on your own feet about how you can do what was told to you as your objective. How can you do it better? I see so many testers saying, no, I've been told to execute these 5 tests. I see a problem elsewhere, but that is not my scope. That is not what I've been told to. I know I can automate this, but I've been told not to automate because that's some other team's responsibility. Or I've been told to automate this, but this test does not make sense. But I've been told to automate. I'm just going to do that. Because if I don't, I'm going to get penalized in different forms for it. So my whole approach has been, how can you start being a human again and apply the human brain in whatever activity you're doing? Do it myself and help others around me start thinking on their own.
Right. And in other words, empower the team on the ground to do the right things and identify the right things rather than being spoon-fed.
Yes, empower is also actually a very big loaded word in that sense, right? It sounds like a lot of prescriptive and almost like a jargon of sorts, and another buzzword in that sense.
Okay.
But you just have to get back to basic. I don't have to tell you, you need to breathe to live. But the minute I tell you, you become conscious, you start focusing on your breathing. Your breathing slows down because you're more conscious about it. All you need to do is make people aware what they are capable of. And the organizations in many cases don't allow you to be empowered. They might talk about empowerment, but they don't allow you to be empowered, to take decisions, to do things which might not necessarily be in your scope. Right. And that's the problem of the organization culture, the way they are set up. But those who are keen, who see that light, who see the opportunity, there's always an opportunity in some other organization, if not their current one, where they can actually utilize their skills and their mind to do things in a better way.
Do you see this problem with empowerment even today with organizations? Because the industry has come a long way. Has it diminished at least?
It has definitely diminished. And it's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not a light switch that is going to just flip or change in a second, right? Or a fraction of a second. It takes time. And unfortunately, this is again a challenge of our industry. Maybe it's a challenge more of the service industry than the product organizations that is there, right? When Agile came, suddenly everyone wanted to be Agile. And what happened? You've got certifications, you've got courses, you've got material that you will read or hear from others, but it's the same people, the same mindset, just with a different prescription book that you are trying to execute in a different fashion. If the leads, the managers, the management, their thought process is not going to evolve what Agile really means, just changing the approach is not going to make a difference.
Right.
So if the same person who's just, instead of being called a team manager or test manager, is now being going to call a scrum master or something else, but the mindset is still the same. I still need to execute the 1,000 test cases. The test cases have not changed. The product is not changed. Just my title has changed. What my approach needs to be has changed, but I don't fully understand it. I'm calling these as ceremonies. Ceremonies is something you're going along the road, you see a temple, you bow down without even knowing you're doing that. Do you truly believe in it? If you believe, why don't you consciously stop? You consciously offer a prayer over there. Why do you need a temple over there necessarily? You could stand where you are and offer a prayer. Whatever religion you might be, whatever deity or God or whatever you call it, you might think of who inspires you and guides you. You don't need to be in a particular position. You understand that better, right? That understanding aspect is very important. And again, it's a journey. You start off with a prescription-based approach. I need to do a stand-up, a daily stand-up. I need to have a sprint planning meeting. I need to have a retrospective. If you, after doing that for a couple of times, if you don't see the value of why you're doing it, then it's the same thing that you're getting into a rut of what you were doing in waterfall as well. The only difference is you're doing it more frequently. You're not learning from it. You're not evolving from it.
Yeah, very interesting that you should understand the core character of the process that you're trying to follow. Sure, it might start with a prescription, it might start with some structure and some ceremonies, but unless you get to the heart of it and really internalize and really understand the meaning of it, not going to go anywhere. And the same applies to pretty much everything in software, not just processes. Applies to coding, applies to quality. You understand why a rule exists, why a anecdote or a best practice exists, with what purpose, because that allows you to bend it as well.
Correct. And I would actually not call it bend it, right? Bend it sounds negative in a certain way. What I would say is you'll make it more contextual. You'll make it more applicable to yourself, right? Because again, this is a typical challenge, right? And it's a true challenge. If I want to learn a new technology, let's say I want to learn a new programming language. I'm going to start reading about it as a physical book or online course or something, but they are going to teach me the hello world type of examples. How to get started, how to write a function, a method, a class, or whatever basic thing you'll be able to do with that. But if I want to now take that to the next level, no book or no course is going to tell me how to build an enterprise software. I need to learn these different practices, patterns, design patterns, principles. I need to understand the product better and see how can I leverage these in the right combination to create a product out of it. Right? That's when the intelligence comes across. So the practices is about that. Yes, I know there are hundreds of practices. Which ones are applicable to me in this current context? And if it is not working, how can I make a change? If it is working, is there a chance to optimize it and make it even better? Right? There's always an opportunity to get better. There's never an end state to this. Because even a small change of dynamics changes the whole approach. A new team member coming on board brings in different experiences, brings in different dynamics. You have to learn that approach. You have to get that person onboarded. You have to learn from his or her experience as well and evolve to see what might be even better. It is never going to remain the same.
Right.
So bending it sounds a little bit negative, but
yeah, putting it in context. making it more
Involving
contextual.
it is very important based on what is adding value.
Right. Completely agree with that rephrase. Thank you for spelling that out. Awesome. So, what are some of the things around quality that you do today? What are some of the best practices or those nuggets of insider knowledge that you figured out along the way? And you practice that even today. Let's talk about some of the specifics that you end up practicing.
So first of all, I am a strong believer that there is no such thing like a best practice.
Okay.
These are practices. Now, when it works for you in that particular context, it has become a best practice for you. But the same thing might not work in another context. Right? Like, for example, I worked on, though my career, I've focused on testing, quality, automation predominantly. I've used various different tools, technologies, programming languages in that. In some cases, I had to use JavaScript. Now, I'm not a JavaScript person because JavaScript by nature is a async language. Automation by nature is a very sync scripted process of how you're going to automate a particular test.
Yeah.
Right? Now, in that particular case, when I first started learning JavaScript, I tried to use the same principles, practices, what I had done for automation in JavaScript, and I failed miserably. Because there were, first of all, too many variables. I was learning JavaScript, I was learning to apply the concepts of building a maintainable, scalable, reusable framework in JavaScript. And I just took on too much that I could handle in that one project.
Right.
And I failed miserably. Does it mean JavaScript is bad? No. There are millions of developers, testers using JavaScript. And it is a fantastic language. It gives a lot of value. For me, that was not the right thing. So does it mean JavaScript is a bad thing to use for automation? Of course not. Right? But the next time when I had the opportunity, maybe not by choice or by choice, doesn't matter. But when I had to work on JavaScript project next time, I was able to apply the learnings from the mistakes that I did from my first attempt, and I made that successful the second time around. Of course, the difference also was I had different colleagues, team members working with me. So the support could have been different, the skill sets could have been different, the project context was definitely different because there were different projects that I was working on. There were so many different aspects, but first time I failed, second time I succeeded. And I, from my individual contribution perspective, is what I'm talking about, not the project, right? Or not the team necessarily. So I was able to make it myself successful. Because I was successful, the team was also more successful as a result. I was able to contribute more in that. But second time, I would not say JavaScript is a bad language because I was able to make it work and solve the objective. So the best practice aspect, first of all, is a misnomer. And people going to conferences or listening to webinars, videos, podcasts, looking for best practices, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. Look for practices. What are the different practices? In what context they became best or not? Try to understand that and then make it your own experience to say when you have to apply those, in what cases will a practice become good or not for you? And as you keep doing this more and more times, the more times you try and repeat this, the more experience you gain. Just looking at a context, looking back in your memory, what are the different practices? You will be able to figure out these practices might become best practices in this new context, or these practices will definitely not work in this new context even before you try it out. That's what experience will get to you. It will teach you.
Yeah, so exactly. With the experience, you will be able to understand the deeper heart of the process and put it in context and decide whether it works for you or not. But that's going to require experience.
Exactly.
And how will people begin? There must be some starting point. So is it feasible for people to just know a lot of process and select on their own? More like, me trying to pick medicines for myself. There needs to be a prescription.
Absolutely. There needs to be And I follow a checklist even today for that matter, right?
Hmm.
It's not a checklist that I write down necessarily, but again, based on experience, these are certain things that get ingrained in your mind, right? What are the different things you need to do before you start off on anything else? So things like understanding the context first, understanding the different set of tools, processes, practices, technologies that can help in that context. And then you try to do some sort of a mapping. But you need to start somewhere. Like the first time I started with JavaScript, I had no idea what it was. So unless I try it out, I would not know. And this is where, again, the understanding of Agile is very important, because the core values or the principles that Agile talks about, people over processes, you look at incremental software delivery. Again, I'm mixing up methodology and practices in certain ways, but these are core values that come out of it when I think about Agile. When it comes to software delivery, I want to fail fast. So if I don't know what I need to do, what tool, technology, practice, or anything that I need to start off with, what are the success criterias or the negotiables, non-negotiables in the deliverable that I need to have? And the first thing you want to do is, if there is a if there is a non-negotiable and I'm leaning towards a certain tool, let's pick up JavaScript again for a reason, right?
Okay.
That's an example. If I have to use a JavaScript based programming language for automating on this new project, and there are certain aspects of the objective which are non-negotiable, I want to prove that this language is actually going to suit that purpose, or at what point it is going to fail. Right? So for example, I have no JavaScript experience. I want to run my tests in parallel. I want to run it in the cloud, for example. I want to find that minimal, the MVP of sorts, right? What is the minimum thing that I need to do to prove it is not going to work or it will work? Fail fast. So identification of the right POCs when you are starting off to prove whether it is going to be successful or not is very important. That is the first thing to do. The second thing is, of course, what is my role in that particular team? If I'm going as a consultant, I'm not there as an employee. That means I'm not going to be there forever. Forever is also a very loose term, right? I'm not going to be there for a couple of years. I might be there for 2 months, 6 months, a year maximum of sorts. And then it is the team that's going to take it forward. Will the team be able to take it forward even when I am not there? So these are some aspects that I keep in mind when I have to start on something that is new for me. Whether I have experience or not, that definitely adds if you have experience, because then you'll be able to fail faster and take those decisions quickly. But if you don't have the experience, you need to think about what are the different things I need to know. My objective is very important. If I'm clear about the end result, then I can decide the choice of parameters to see if it is going to work or not. Experiments is important. Reaching out to other people in the organization or maybe in the community. When you speak in the community about a specific context, you generalize it. You don't want to give out internal information, right? So how do you generalize it and say, okay, this is a concept, I'm trying to use this. Does it make sense? Or can anyone guide me? How can I achieve this? So for example, OTP validation is a very complex or a blocker in various automations. If I cannot validate an OTP, how do I proceed? So the first thing, if I have to do a automation for a project which requires OTP, before starting off, I need to figure out how am I going to validate this? What tools, technologies do I need in place? What testable hooks do I need in the system to maybe allow doing that? If that is not, is there even value in doing the automation? I have seen so many teams have built complex automation frameworks and they say, no, this is the only device that we can use, and manually we fetch the OTP, enter it, and then the automation runs forward. What is the value of that automation?
Right. Interesting. Let's actually, completely agree with a lot of points, but let's double click on this OTP situation a little bit. We have seen this I have seen it in my previous organizations where typically OTP is a problem for automations. There are two approaches that I have personally seen. First is that the automation is going to happen not from a particular device, but with a particular account or a particular set of accounts. And then there is custom code that's injected in the system, which recognizes those specific accounts, maybe through a configuration or a properties file, whatever, or worse, it's hard coded, and a set OTP is generated for them. And then the automation also has that same OTP hard coded in its code, and it goes forward because the same OTP is there on both sides. So first is hard coding of OTPs for set accounts. And second was a slightly more complex approach where the OTP was published internally, and there was a separate service that was published to fetch the OTP, and that service would honor fetching the OTP only for internal accounts, only for some certain whitelisted accounts. But the OTP is going to be truly dynamic. That allows you to test the failed OTP scenario as well. With the hard-coded OTP approach, you can't test when the wrong OTP is entered, what happens.
Correct.
It's harder. So the second one is more dynamic. Are there more approaches? Like, what have you seen work well?
So there is pros and cons to both the approaches that you said. Okay. So first of all, let's talk about both those approaches itself.
Yeah.
The first approach where you're injecting code and have test accounts mapped to that injected code to give a set OTP, or ignore the OTP for those accounts, whatever the logic might be, is a huge risk. Why? Because now you are injecting custom test code into the product, which is not going to go live.
It's never going to run in production, basically.
It's never going to run in production. That means you are testing based on something which is not going to production.
Right.
That is one aspect of the risk. The second aspect of the risk is you are not going to be able to generate or test the dynamically generated OTPs itself. What if there is a problem in the OTP generation, but you're always giving the hard-coded OTPs back, right?
Right.
That is the second problem. The third thing is, if your organization has any compliance teams of sorts, depending on nature of the product, you might have compliance teams, security teams, and they will not allow this type of code to exist in your code base itself because it is not going to go live, or it is sort of hidden behind a feature toggle or something as well, right?
Yeah.
You manage that. And the risk of what if it gets exposed to in production because of a misconfiguration.
Correct.
So the first approach has got a lot of risks in that aspect. The second approach is better in that sense because you could say the service that is exposed, which can retrieve the OTP for you, is an internal service only. We are not even going to expose this service outside.
Yes.
It is there in production, but that service is not exposed anywhere outside. Your API gateway, whatever has it, it doesn't have a routing for that service in production.
Yeah.
So it's used only internally in that sense. And that definitely becomes a better approach for fetching the OTP and running it. Which also means there is a chance that you can run this test against production to validate or do sanity checks in production as well. And because you're on VPN or something, you will still be able to call that internal service, but it doesn't have a path from your gateway. There's a possibility of doing that. The third approach is also there in many cases. Teams also log it to either databases, which might become an overwhelming thing, or you could also publish that on any queue or something where you can just read off it internally, fetch the OTP from there. That could also be a possibility.
Which is a different flavor of the service approach.
Exactly.
The queue becomes the API.
Correct. There are also many external services that are there where they give you temporary numbers, and these are publicly available. They might have a private offering as well. That means you can subscribe to those services and use it just from your testing purposes, like a OTP service of sorts, right? Where they will generate a number for you, and the OTP or whatever message is received on that number is published on their site. So you just query it using API and you can fetch it. But the risk is anyone can query it, whoever has access to that API.
Right.
right? So that there are also many other SMS testing services that are there, and that those numbers are published for different countries and all that, and you could just send a message, but there could be hundreds of organizations using that same number for their own testing, and you are seeing those messages there. It's test messages, and that is what you're understanding and working with.
Yeah, but it is so much better than the previous two approaches because it allows you to test even varied, like more diverse set of scenarios. For example, the OTP should go only to an India number, and if it's a non-India number, then it shouldn't go. System should do something and just not send the OTP, and the flow should get interrupted. This is testable with a non-India.
Well, that test itself is invalid in my opinion, right?
Okay.
If it go to a non-India number, the call should not even go to the OTP service. That number check happens before it goes to the OTP service. And
Yeah,
you get
that is what I meant. Correct.
So I don't need a service or anything in the backend is what I'm saying. I just enter a +65 number.
And you can just test
the app itself says when you make a call to the service, the app itself or the front end itself is going to say with some validation, is this number valid first of all? Number of digits, country code and all that. That validation logic itself will throw an error before you hit the OTP service.
Right. So the service shouldn't even be called, and that's the assertion.
Exactly. It's all shift left, right?
Yeah, let's talk about that. But I do have one more question. You talked about connecting to the database directly from the test code. How good or bad is that? Because many people frown upon that because you're breaching into, like, it's not.
It depends what you're looking. Yeah, it depends what you are doing, right? So first of all, from the test itself, if you need a database access, it should always only be read only. Which is something that, again, I have seen hundreds of teams, they've got read-write access from your test code. You might not be using it, but doesn't mean no one will use it unintentionally or intentionally.
Yeah.
So if you have to connect to database, make sure you always have a read-only access to the database. Second thing, it is okay to query data, and that is actually a very important part of your test data management strategy as well.
Okay.
We'll talk about test data separately, but in this case, right, I'm reading a specific field or a specific table, just querying information out of it. If I have a service that is better because that is going to mask the database for me. I don't need database connectivity. I'm calling a service which is used by anyone else in the application as well. I'm using a reusable component for this. I'm not getting unintentional access to the database, and which means I'm not coupling my test with the database schema.
Yeah.
Right? That is very important. So I would ideally use a service approach over here. Is there a service that I can give a phone number and it will tell me the OTP that was generated for it? That service can be used by anyone else as well. Right? That's a better approach. If it is not there, if the only way to get the OTP generated is from the database, I need to use it. Otherwise, my automation will not proceed. But now think about this. You will get access to the database in specific environments. You will definitely not get it for production. Unless you're a startup type of team, a small team where everyone does everything type of it. In large organizations, large products, you will not get access to production data at all. Compliance, security, and all those aspects, right? You will not get access. So that means there is a restriction of in which environments can your test run. That is another aspect of it. Okay, so that's my answer to, is it good to have access connectivity to database in very specific cases? Reading might be a non-negotiable in many cases. You have to use it, otherwise you cannot proceed.
But even in a read-only access case, today you're accessing a very simple table to retrieve a simple piece of data. But that connection exists in your code base now, in your test code base. So tomorrow, it doesn't prevent anybody from reading very complex set of information and doing some assert. So it can bolster into a different direction.
It can. And that's where the second aspect is also very important to talk about, if that's okay. It's about test data management. Automation requires test data. Ideally, you want your test to be completely independent. It should be able to run in parallel and in any sequence of tests as well.
Right.
Right? That is how you know you have built a good automation framework. You will be able to scale your execution. Now, depending on type of product that you're testing against, you need different types of data. Let's say my user details are easy to manage, for example, right? But I want to, let's consider e-commerce product where you need to have inventory to be able to place orders. Correct? What if that inventory, that product is out of stock, there is no inventory for it and you're trying to place the order? The test is going to fail.
Yeah.
It is not a failure because the test is wrong or the product
code is wrong.
Correct.
Yeah.
It is because your data is not there for it. So ideally what you would do before you run the test, you would create the data that is required and run the test against that. Because your test is in control of creating the data, it places the order, it's able to find the inventory, it places the order and it proceeds. If your test is about, I should not be able to place an order if there is no inventory, then the test is going to ensure for the product it is using, there is no inventory, and then run the test. Then the validations will happen correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in this case, how do you create this data? How do you set up the data? It is not easily possible to manage the inventory or change the inventory dynamically from the test in all products because the applications are complex and it's not just one table entry that you're changing. These are deeply connected systems.
Yeah, same applies to other data pieces as well. If you have to create something, let's say create a user, that might involve some super complicated flow.
Exactly, right? So then what is the other approach? If you cannot create the data, what is the other approach? It's what you said. I've got static set of data. My test is going to use that and go through that. But I can get false failures over there because inventory is out of stock or I got inventory for something which was not supposed to have.
Yeah.
Correct? Your test is going to fail. So again, that's not a scalable solution.
Right.
The third approach is how can you query the system for what exists and based on that dynamically use that in your test. It does not matter if I'm choosing one book or the other. Find me a book which has an inventory and I'm going to use that book to place an order.
Yeah, that might be an easy case to handle, but how about the converse of it? Finding a item that doesn't have inventory. How will you search for that? Because a user will never
That's the answer to your question originally, right? Why you might need access to the database.
No, so even in that case, Anand, would you prefer the application exposing a specific API that is limited to test, and you can think of it as a different microservice that only has test APIs, or it's part of the main application?
See, again, it's a risk. It's a risk. You are building things in the system not necessarily going to go to production or be used in production.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a conscious risk that you need to manage. Ideally, I would have a service do this for me instead of worry about the database details.
Right. Yeah. Because
but that means the teams need to build a service, keep it in sync with the product because it's a test only service. If it is not kept in sync with the product, the service might fail or give false results, which is not used in the application correctly.
Correct.
So ideally, you're using services which is used in the application. That means your application has been designed from a testability point of view as well. But if you don't have that, then connecting to the database is not a bad option to query the data that you need to make your test more dynamic. The risk, of course, is you are now coupling your test with your database. Yeah. And you do not have access to the database in all the environments. That is a risk that you need to think about what approach to take.
Right. Because writing a endpoint that just fetches some data and that's limited to lower environments, again, it will prevent. It will prevent your test
that your DevOps pipelines are set up correctly. Your configurations are also automated. What needs to be exposed and deployed in an environment is completely automated so that unintentionally you don't put your testability hooks in production.
Yeah.
If your configurations are automated, your deployments are automated, then you can say in production, these services are not going to go. And you have tests for that configuration as well. It's all about managing risk. You don't want database connectivity. One is from a risk perspective. Second is from a coupling perspective.
So I'm still curious about how do you run this out of stock scenario in production, right? If you connect to the database, you can't do it in production. If you have an endpoint that is only lower environment specific, again you are blocked in production, can't happen. Another approach that I have seen is that there is specific data created in production. There are test stores in production. In those test stores, there are test items in production. Some items are going to be perennially out of stock. Some items are going to be always in stock.
It's possible, but then how do you prevent these products being exposed to the real users?
Yeah, again, you're back to putting logic in application code to not deal with these stores and have some blacklist somewhere.
So again, I have found a key. That means now I need to go and find a car. Right?
Okay. Still trying to process that. What does that mean?
I found a key lying on the road. I have to go and find the car that matches with the key.
Mm-hmm.
To solve a small testing problem, now you're creating a massive system which is adding more complexity.
Right.
And that has huge risks as well to it. Instead, my question to you is, why do you want to run these types of tests in production if it has already been tested in lower environments?
Yeah, true that.
Again, it's all about managing your path to production, right? What types of tests have you done in the lower environments? And what is the basic required in the higher environments? If you repeat the same test that I've done in lower environments in production as well, what value are you getting? What additional value are you getting? You're also messing up your analytics.
Yeah.
Which is a huge thing, especially in e-commerce type of products, right? Analytics is the funnel that you generate to say, okay, where are you losing people? Now you have to start segregating that as well separately. Oh, this is coming from automation. Keep that out.
So you have to send that markers.
Creating a completely different system in place. Instead, you test better in lower environments. Have a very small smoke test just to make sure deployments have gone through fine. After deployment, you run it fine. And then you have observability in your environment, in production and lower environments to know if something is going wrong, a system is down, a service is down or something, you get alerts for it. You don't have to run a test in production continuously to know if your environment is fine.
Correct. At least not these types of tests. While people might argue that out of stock scenarios might be a good user facing use case to test as well, but not in production. Because
if you have tested in lower environment, why do you need to test it again in higher environment? You need to answer that question. The application architecture can give insights why it is important to test or it's okay not to test. The point is these decisions cannot be taken that easily without having an in-depth understanding of the architecture.
Right. So what you're trying to say is there is no, it's not like you don't test these scenarios because it's harder to build, or that you test these scenarios despite it's harder to build. It's about understanding the context and answering it for yourself. The general
the risk of something not working well. Why do you test?
To ensure that systems work well and they don't fail for
What happens if the system does not work well in production?
It'll fail for the end user, like reduced user experience.
And what will be the result of that?
Lost business.
Lost business. That means you are saying that your product is generating business. Correct? What if the product is a blog?
Okay.
Does it matter if it is down for a day or two? My personal blog, let's take that example.
Maybe not, because not going to be at that scale.
So what does it mean? The risk aspect. What is the risk of something not working well? How often do you see issues reported with inventory out of stock?
Got it. If it's a persistent issue, you might want to invest into it so that you get
That's
saved.
where the priority and severity also comes, right?
Huh.
If it's a mobile app, for example, inventory out of stock, the app crashes. Okay. It's definitely a P1. What is the severity of that? It could be S3, because the
not a lot of users.
instance of this happening in production is for very specific set of users or very specific type of products.
Right.
Once in a while type of scenarios. Severity is low, priority is high. But if there is a bad error message or a stack trace or something being reported to the user, priority might be less, but severity is high because it's impacting the end user, it's impacting the brand reputation.
Right.
These are things, unfortunately, that testers do not think about a lot. And I'm talking more about testers, but it's equally applicable to other roles as well. If you don't understand the impact of what you're doing on the end user, you will not understand the risk of that thing not working, what's going to be there on the business, on the users. And if you don't understand that risk, you will not see that. And that comes back to my learning from a customer experience person, right?
Okay.
Customer service.
Yeah.
If you don't understand the impact of what you're doing, it's meaningless.
Right.
And
this is actually, perfect entry into the shift left as well. That as developers, you bear the responsibility of testing. You can't just put it onto some different team who is going to test it for you. That's ineffective due to multiple reasons. But let's talk about shift left. What are your thoughts on it? Is that a good thing? Is that an unconditionally good thing, which you have established that nothing is an unconditionally good thing?
See, we cannot think of shift left or shift right like a train track or an airport runway. Where the plane is moving only in, let's take the airport runway. I fly more than travel by train these days. A runway at a given point, you'll have landings or takeoffs happening only in one direction.
Right.
You cannot have plane taking off in one direction and landing from the other direction at the same time.
Yeah.
If it changes for both.
True that.
We unfortunately think of shift left like a runway. It is only that we need to shift left. By shifting left, what do we mean? We are including aspects of quality in the left side as well. Testing is considered to be the rightmost activity. In fact, it is not the rightmost activity. It is a few steps before the rightmost activity.
Yeah, the rightmost being the hitting production.
Production and getting feedback from production, customer service, customer success, SREs, and feeding that back as a feedback cycle into this. Into your development cycle, into your requirement cycle rather. Right? It's a loop. It's not a linear track. It's the first part. Right? So shift left is moving testing, which was considered to be the last phase before release. You're moving it into the left side of it. Now, when you're moving it left, that means developers come into picture. Developers need to start taking more ownership of quality. Right? I like to think of shift left not as a linear movement. I like to think of it like a pendulum.
Okay.
Pendulum, if stagnant, is just lying straight. It is not moving at all. Yes, it is not moving at all. And if it is not moving, that means you are just focused on the activities that you are doing. And that is what a lot of teams, they just ask the testing team to say, okay, what is the quality of the product? Can we do a release or not? That is not right. We need all roles, left and right of testers, to be involved in taking ownership of quality. And each has to do their own part. So to me, shift left in isolation of shift right is incomplete. You cannot just move the pendulum left. You have to move it right as well. And the whole aspect of quality is the arc of the pendulum. That needs to happen. So product owners, business owners, product owners, designers, developers, testers. Testers include automation folks, DevOps, SRE, customer success. they all need to be involved in quality because they are all working on some aspect of the product or the other, and they need to ensure that it is working as expected.
Interesting.
So
Very interesting.
very important because it moves the focus away just from testers doing testing. But it's not just shift left. You also need to think about shift right, where are you automating your deployments? Are you automating your configurations? Are you automating the feedback loop that is coming back? Or have some mechanisms for getting the feedback loop from production back into your requirement cycle.
Yeah. And avoid things like customers crafting the failure scenarios and giving you the reproducibility steps.
That means observability comes into picture,
Yeah.
alerting comes into the picture, analytics comes into the picture, measuring the success of your features. Product owners, they promise if you do this feature, you will get this value, number of users, revenue, whatever it is. How are we measuring that and feeding it back into the cycle to say, oh, we actually did better than what we expected? Let's feed it back into the cycle and see how we can do that for the other features as well. We were not able to meet the targets or the projections. Let's feed it back into the cycle, understand why. Because development team always gets bombarded with product saying these are 10 features I needed them yesterday. But you cannot do all of them together. You have to prioritize. We prioritize based on what is the biggest impact or the biggest value that we'll get. If that value is not seen, product team needs to know about it. What went wrong? Why was the value not seen? We pushed a feature, we paused other features, and when pushing this, maybe some other feature would have given us more value. That feedback needs to come back into the cycle.
Yeah, so that's more on the business decision and feature prioritization.
And this is where shift left again comes into the picture. Very important, not just business, right? Because developers cannot just take this and say, okay, fine, this is a feature I need to work, I'll do this. They need to ask these questions. What is the impact? How are you going to measure it? Do you have ability to measure it included in the requirements? Because you need to include aspects of capturing that information as well, right? Developers need to code for that.
Yeah.
If they ask the question, how are you going to measure it? Then they'll say the feature is released, but we don't have a way to measure it.
So then you're blind.
Again, developers are not just doing testing, they're asking questions. This requirement, how am I going to test it? How do you know this will give us better value?
Right.
Because then they can code accordingly to solve that purpose.
Yeah,
so it's not just about developers doing more testing. It's also they asking more relevant questions.
Yeah, and even having that lens, to take a more crude example, if you structure your code in a certain way, it might not be testable.
Correct.
But if you structure it slightly differently, it becomes more testable. So just having that lens also helps and structure the code better.
Yeah.
And just to paraphrase what you said, shift left is no magic wand. And shift left, like blind shift left, can be as harmful because it only expects developers to think about quality. It's as harmful as expecting only testers to think about quality. Because it's other extreme.
Absolutely.
Nice. Okay, so in our final leg of the conversation, what are some of the mistakes that you see the developers commit today? We talked about some of them, we talked about various aspects of testing, but if you had to give advice that, guys, please stop committing these obvious mistakes that I see literally everyone do, what would be your take on it?
So advice to developers?
Yes, in today's time.
Yeah, it's simple, right? First of all, ask those questions about the requirements. Don't just take it blindly at par. Ask, how am I going to measure the success of this? Ask the testers, how are you going to test this? So that gives them additional information, what is required to be implemented as well. Because a requirement might be focused on only one part, but testers have got more context of the whole system, how that feature is going to be used or fits into the larger product. That means there are more test cases, scenarios that testers will think about, which developers will not have the insights into unless they ask those questions.
Right.
And that becomes added information for them before they start coding.
Yeah.
It would be great if they write tests for the code that they have written, but the minimal that they need to do is understand the test cases and scenarios for that requirement before they start coding. And they need to do a good sanity of that once they say, before they hand it over to say, yes, I'm done with that requirement. That is very important. So that is the first step that I would say developers need to take. Understand it better, not just what is said in the requirement document, but understand it more from a testability perspective as well, and the measurability perspective as well.
Many people object to this by saying that it takes too much time to write test cases for everything that we are doing, because it increases your time to code by 50%, at times 100%, because there is so much discussion that you need to do and so much of thinking that you need to do before the code comes out. Why is this a wrong belief?
Well, it's clearly developers like to work more on fixing defects than writing new code. It seems like that, in that if that is the attitude of a certain set of people, right?
Yeah.
If you like to work on defects, then fine. Don't test your code better. But if you want to work on new features, make sure, feel pride on what you have released is defect free, it is adding value, and you need to make sure you take those extra steps to do that.
Right.
Not everyone can be a Virat Kohli, but Virat Kohli inspires a lot of people to start working better on their fitness. It is all about that. You get injured, you're out of action. You write bad code, you get a ton of defects. The product quality suffers, brand suffers, and you are in an endless cycle of fixing defects instead of working on new features.
Yeah, so it gives illusion of speed in the short term.
It is absolutely very well said. It is an illusion of speed, but speed does not mean it is quality.
Interesting. Okay, so think about more on what you're coding and ask questions and think about testing.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify, right? Testers might give you 100 test cases scenarios. Not everything is required to be automated. But the important pieces from your implementation perspective, you need to have tests for that to prevent issues going into the code. Not everything has to be automated. Tests that are going to be repeated in nature, you should automate. Will it be automated at unit test, API test, UI test, performance, security test? That's a conversation to be had. The repeated tests need to be automated. The other test, you test it once, make sure everything is fine, and you proceed. Right? So it's not that everything has to be automated. Just want to clarify that.
Yeah, I think that's whole another topic about how to select what to be automated and how to detect and pull back when you're over automating and strategies of automation. So that's for another time. This was a great conversation. Loved chatting with you, Anand, and thank you for taking out the time to chat with us.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you.